It was a quiet morning in late autumn, the kind of morning when sunlight feels tired and the wind carries stories of old days. I was sitting by the window of my small room in the nursing home, a cup of tea in my hands, and 1,000 thoughts in my head. The tea had already gone cold, but I did not mind. After all, silence had become my closest companion over the past year. There were sounds around me. Footsteps in the hallway, the rustling of papers, the faint hum of a distant TV. But none of them reached my heart. It was as if the world had continued to move on. While I had quietly stepped aside, I often watched the trees outside my window. Their leaves had begun to fall again, golden and tired, much like my own memories. It had been exactly 1 year since my son David left me here. People say time heals all wounds, but sometimes time just teaches you how to hide them better. I remember the first few weeks after I arrived. I used to count the days, waiting for him to visit, to call, even to write. But the phone stayed silent, and the letters never came. Eventually I stopped waiting, or at least I told myself I did. That morning I was lost in those quiet thoughts when I heard it. A knock on the door. It was gentle at first. Then again, louder, uncertain. No one usually knocked on my door that early. For a moment I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard it again. 3 knocks. Slow. Hesitant. I stood up, my hands slightly trembling. The cup slipped from my fingers and rolled onto the carpet. My heart began to race, as if it already knew something my mind had not yet realized. When I reached the door, I paused. Through the small glass window, I could see a shadow. Tall, familiar, and shaking. I opened the door slowly, and there he was. David, my son, the same man who once promised to take care of me for the rest of my life. The same man who drove me to this place with a smile and said, "Mom, it's just for a short time." But this was not the same David I remembered. His shoulders were hunched, his clothes were wet from the rain, and his eyes were filled with fear and shame. For a few seconds, we both just stood there. No words, just silence. Finally he spoke, his voice breaking like a child's. "Mom, please." I did not know where else to go. I could not speak. My throat felt tight, my heart heavy. He looked so lost. The confident man I once knew was gone. There was something fragile about him now, something broken. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to ask him why he left me, why he forgot me, why he thought I was a burden. But all I could do was look at him. He whispered again, "Mom, please, I need your help." The irony of those words cut deep. Help. That was all I ever wanted to give him. My life, my time, my love. Everything had been for him. And now, after all this time, he stood at my door, asking for it again. I slowly stepped aside and said softly, "Come in." He walked in quietly, his shoes leaving small wet marks on the floor. I noticed his hands shaking as he held a torn envelope. For a moment, I felt my heart melt. A mother's heart never really stops caring, even after it's been broken. But deep inside, another feeling stirred. Not revenge, not anger. Something quieter, older. Maybe it was disappointment. Maybe it was acceptance. He sat on the small chair near my table, looking around the room. "It's small," he said softly. "Yes," I replied, "but it's enough for me." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. I watched him silently. The man I had raised, fed, and believed in. The same boy who used to bring me flowers from the garden now sat in front of me like a stranger. After a long pause, I finally asked, "Why are you here, David?" He took a deep breath. I lost everything," he said. "The business failed. Claire left, I have nowhere to go. For a moment, I closed my eyes. I remembered that last day. His smile, his wife's cold voice, the car driving away. I remembered the ache in my chest as I waved goodbye, thinking he would return soon. And now, 1 year later, he had returned. Not out of love, but out of need. He reached for my hand. "Mom, I am sorry. Please forgive me." His touch felt unfamiliar, like holding a memory that no longer belonged to me. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, I said quietly, "I never thought I would see this day, David." He looked up at me, confused. "What day, Mom?" "The day you would come back to me. Not because you wanted to, but because you had nowhere else to go." He lowered his head, ashamed. I walked to the window, looking at the golden leaves falling outside, the same leaves that had witnessed my first night alone in this place. "Sit down," I said softly. "I will make you some tea." As I poured the water and watched the steam rise, a strange calm filled the room. It was not happiness, not sadness, something in between. And as the kettle whispered and the wind brushed the window, my mind slowly drifted back to the time when everything had begun, back to the days when life was full of laughter, when my son was still my little boy, when the world had not yet turned so cold. That was the beginning of everything that led me here. When I close my eyes, I can still see the house where my life truly lived. It was not big or grand, but every corner carried a piece of love, laughter, and memories that time could never erase. That house was where I became a wife, a mother, and later, a widow. After my husband passed away, the world suddenly felt too quiet, too wide and too heavy. For a while, I did not know how to fill the silence he left behind. But then, I would hear the sound of tiny feet running through the hallway, and the laughter of my little boy, David. That sound became my purpose. I remember his small hands tugging at my skirt, his innocent eyes asking, "Mom, when will Dad come back?" I never found the right word, so I just held him close and said, "He is watching us, sweetheart. We have to make him proud." From that day on, everything I did was for him. I worked long hours at the local library, sorting books, cleaning shelves, helping visitors find stories that could heal their hearts, while quietly trying to heal mine. Every evening when I came home tired and worn, David would be waiting at the door with a big smile and a small drawing in his hand. "Look, Mom, this is us, you and me." And I would smile even when my body ached from exhaustion, because in that moment, all my pain disappeared. He was my reason to keep going. As years passed, we built a quiet little world together, one filled with simple joys. Cooking breakfast on Sundays, walking to the park in spring, watching old movies at night with popcorn and laughter echoing through the living room. There were days when I barely had enough money to buy groceries, but I always made sure he never noticed. I wanted his childhood to be light, not burdened by my struggles. I remember one night I found him sleeping on the couch, surrounded by open books and sketches. He wanted to be an architect. His dream was to design buildings that would touch the sky. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "You will, my boy. One day, you will." That dream became mine, too. Years rolled by like pages in a well-read book. David grew taller, wiser, and busier. He studied hard, earned scholarships, and I worked extra shifts to pay for the rest. There were times I had to choose between my medicine and his school fees. I always chose him, because a mother's love is not measured in comfort. It is measured in sacrifice. When he finally graduated, I remember standing in that crowded hall, holding a small bouquet of flowers. I was wearing my old dress, the one with faded colors, but endless pride. He walked across the stage, took his diploma, and looked straight at me with a smile that said, "We did it, Mom." And I cried, not because it was over, but because I had finally kept my promise to his father. I had raised a good man. When David got his first job, he took me out to dinner. He looked handsome in his new suit, confident and full of dreams. He ordered my favorite soup and said, "Mom, from now on, I will take care of you. No more working late nights. No more worries." I laughed and said, "We will see about that." But deep down, I believed him. That night, when we returned home, he hugged me longer than usual. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." I told him, all I ever wanted was to see you happy. And for a while he truly was. Then one day, he told me he had met someone. Her name was Claire. He said she was smart, beautiful, and ambitious. Everything he ever wanted in a partner. I was happy for him. Every mother dreams of the day her child finds love. When he brought her home for the first time, I prepared everything perfectly. Her favorite food, fresh flowers, and the nicest tablecloth. Claire was polite, elegant, and had a smile that could light up a room. But there was something about her eyes. A certain coldness I could not quite name. Still, I welcomed her with open arms. I told her, "David has always been my greatest blessing. Now he will be yours too." She smiled back, but her lips did not reach her eyes. After their wedding, everything began to change. Slowly at first, then all at once. I moved with them into a new house David had bought. It was beautiful. Large rooms, shiny floors, and modern furniture. But somehow, it never felt like home. At first, Claire was kind. She would bring me tea, ask about my day, and even call me Mom. But as months passed, her kindness turned into politeness, and politeness slowly turned into distance. I noticed small things. My belongings being moved from the living room to the guest room. My favorite teacup replaced with new ones. My advice quietly ignored. Then came the comments. Soft, but sharp enough to leave scars. Maybe Mom should rest more. "Mom, you should not worry about these things. They are too stressful for you." Each word carried a wall between us. David changed too. He was always busy, always tired, always distracted. When I tried to talk to him, he would smile and say, "Mom, you worry too much." The dinners grew quieter. My stories became interruptions, and my presence, a reminder of a past they did not want to carry. One evening I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Claire said, "David, we need our own space. She deserves to be around people her age. It is not healthy for her to be here all the time." He sighed and said, "Maybe you're right." I stood in the hallway, frozen. I wanted to walk in and tell them I could still cook, still laugh, still live. But the words never left my lips. A few days later, David came to my room. He sat beside me and held my hand gently. "Mom," he said, "I found a lovely place, a senior home. It has gardens, a library, even a piano. You will love it there. Just for a while, okay?" I smiled weakly. "Just for a while?" "Yes, just until things settle down," he replied. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust his voice, just like I always had. I nodded and said, "All right, my dear, if that makes you happy." That night I packed a small suitcase, only what I needed. A few clothes, some photographs, and an old music box my husband had given me. When David came to pick me up, I looked around the house one last time. The walls were silent. The smell of home was fading already. As we drove away, I kept looking through the window, watching the house disappear behind the trees. It felt like I was watching my life vanish in slow motion. When we reached the nursing home, it looked quiet and clean. Too quiet. David smiled and said, "See? It is peaceful here." I nodded. My voice refused to speak. He helped me unpack, placed my things on the small table and said, "I will visit every weekend." I wanted to hold him and tell him not to go, but I did not want to be a burden, so I smiled and said, "Drive safely, son." He kissed my forehead and walked away. I stood by the window watching him leave. He did not look back, not even once. The sound of his car faded into the distance, leaving behind nothing but silence. I sat on the bed, opened my suitcase, and took out the music box. When I turned the key, the soft tune filled the room. The same melody my husband once played when I felt afraid. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely alone. The first few weeks in the nursing home were like waking in a dream I never wanted to live. The walls were pale, the floors polished and cold. Everything was clean, sterile, and orderly. But it had no warmth. I unpacked my small suitcase and placed my few belongings neatly on the table beside the bed. A few photographs, a small music box, and the necklace my mother had given me many years ago. The one I never let go of. The other residents were polite but distant. They had their routines, their own friends, and I was new. I smiled at them, offered a kind word, and sometimes when no one was around, I whispered to myself, "I am still here, still me." David came to visit twice that first month. He always arrived in a rush, checking his watch, asking if everything was all right. He held my hand for a brief moment, said, "I will see you next weekend, Mom," and left. Every time the door closed behind him, I felt a small piece of my heart vanish. I wanted to call him, to ask him why he had abandoned me, why he thought this was the only solution, but the words refused to leave my lips. I told myself, "Do not make a scene, Grace. Be patient. One day he will see." Patience became my companion. Silence became my friend. But loneliness was a relentless shadow. I spent my days walking slowly through the corridors, learning the names of other residents. Mrs. Thompson, who always wore a lavender scarf and hummed old songs from the radio. Mr. Harris, who could not stop talking about his time in the Navy, though no one ever listened fully. I learned to nod, to smile, and to keep my stories to myself. Sharing memories was dangerous. People either pitied me or ignored me completely. Meals were the hardest. The cafeteria smelled of disinfectant and reheated food. Plates clanged, voices echoed, and I often found myself staring at an empty chair across the table. That chair had once held David, my son. And sometimes I would imagine him sitting there, laughing, asking about my day, pretending that nothing had changed. But it was only imagination. Reality was quiet, cold, painfully still. The nurses were kind but busy. They checked on me, gave me my medications, and reminded me of appointments. I thanked them politely, but I did not trust anyone completely. I had spent a lifetime giving my heart and receiving little in return. It was easier to rely on myself. I started keeping a journal, small notes about the day, my thoughts, and my dreams. I wrote about David, about Claire, about the house I had left behind. Writing became a form of therapy. Each word was a whisper of my soul, a way to remind myself that I still existed. One afternoon, as I sat by the window, I noticed a young nurse, Emily, struggling with a resident who had fallen. I walked over instinctively and helped her lift the man gently onto a chair. "Thank you, Mrs. Grace," she said, smiling. "You have such a kind heart." For the first time in weeks, I felt warmth. Someone had noticed me, truly noticed me. It was then I realized something important. I could not rely on David to give me value. I had to find it for myself, even if it was just in small acts of kindness. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I found solace in small routines. Walking in the garden, feeding the birds, knitting scarves for the residents, reading old novels. I discovered that even in a place designed for endings, life could bloom in tiny, unnoticed ways. The staff began to notice. "Grace, you have such patience with everyone," one nurse told me. And slowly, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I still had purpose. Then one day, an unexpected letter arrived. It was from a lawyer's office. Someone I had almost forgotten about. The envelope was thick, official, and had my name printed neatly on it. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were documents confirming a property in my name. A house, fully paid, with investments I had inherited years ago from my late aunt. I sat there, stunned. The realization hit me. I had been more independent than I had ever allowed myself to feel, even in the silence of the nursing home, even in the absence of my son. I had a life, my own life. The news slowly sank in over days. I walked through the corridors with a new light in my step. Residents began to notice, curious about my sudden brightness. I decided quietly to take control of my story again. I started managing the small investments online, calling banks, speaking with lawyers. I discovered a power I had forgotten, a freedom that was mine alone, regardless of David or Claire. It was during one of these afternoons, while balancing accounts and reviewing paperwork, that I felt a small tap on my shoulder. "Mom?" I looked up. It was one of the staff members holding a cup of tea. "You look different today," she said softly. I smiled. I have finally realized that being alone does not mean being helpless. Her eyes sparkled with understanding. For the first time in months, someone saw me as more than just a resident. Months passed and life in the nursing home became tolerable. I made small friendships. I laughed quietly at old jokes. I even helped a few residents reconnect with family. But the shadow of David's absence never truly left. Every phone call, every email, every visitor reminded me that I had been left behind. And still the question lingered in my mind. Why had he abandoned me? Was it truly because of convenience? Or had he grown selfish, blind to the sacrifices I had made? One rainy evening as I walked back from the garden, I overheard a conversation in the hallway. A group of younger visitors were laughing, talking about their parents. Some mentioned neglect, others mentioned gratitude. But every story carried one lesson. Children rarely understand the depth of their parents' love until it is too late. I felt a sharp pang in my chest. I had given everything. My youth, my energy, my money, my heart. And yet, I was left alone. But then I remembered something important. Love is not always measured by recognition. Sometimes it is measured by endurance. And I had endured. The nursing home gradually became a place of reflection. I watched the sun rise and set, noting the changing colors on the horizon. I listened to the birds, counted the leaves on the trees, and observed small miracles in ordinary moments. I started writing letters, not to David or Claire, not yet, but letters to myself. Every memory, every thought, every feeling poured onto the pages. It was as if I was reclaiming pieces of myself I had thought were lost forever. Then one day, a knock at the door startled me. It was a social worker carrying a small envelope. Inside was a note. "Your son is in trouble. He needs you." I froze. Memories of the past year. The betrayal, the loneliness, the pain. Flooded back like a storm. Yet beneath it all, a quiet voice whispered, "This is your chance. Not for him. For yourself." For the first time, I realized the story was not over. Not yet. The distance, the abandonment, the loneliness. They had shaped me, strengthened me, and prepared me for what was coming. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. The sacrifices, the pain, the love, the betrayal, and most importantly, my resilience. I understood that whatever happened next, I was no longer a woman defined by her son's choices. I was a woman with a life of her own, a life that could not be taken away, even by those I loved most. Soft music swells, slow piano fades in, and so when morning came, I dressed carefully in my favorite gray sweater, tied my hair neatly, and walked toward the window. Outside, the world seemed different. Not better, not worse. Just waiting. Waiting for me to step forward. Step forward into the truth. Step forward into the life I had built for myself. Step forward into the reckoning that was coming. With David, I woke that morning with a quiet determination I had not felt in decades. The letter from the social worker was still on my bedside table. A small envelope that seemed heavier than any suitcase I had ever carried. David needed me, and yet, for the first time in my life, I realized I would help him, not because I owed him, but because I could. Because I finally knew my own value. I got dressed carefully, choosing a light gray sweater and my favorite black slacks. I combed my hair, tying it into a neat bun. Every movement was deliberate. Purposeful. For the first time in years, I was not rushing to please anyone. I was moving for myself. When I called the number on the note, David's voice sounded different. Broken. Desperate. "Mom, I do not know what to do. Everything has gone wrong. Please, you have to help me." I did not answer immediately. Instead, I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. I pictured the years of silence, the abandoned evenings, the words never spoken. And then I reminded myself I had endured. I had survived. I had grown stronger. "Yes, David," I said finally, my voice calm but firm. "I will help, but you will listen to me, and you will understand something important. Nothing is owed to you automatically. You will respect the life I have built, and you will acknowledge what you lost." There was a pause. I could hear him swallowing hard on the other end. I understand, Mom. Thank you." The drive to his house was long, quiet, filled with memories of the life we had once shared. I passed familiar streets, the park where he had run with his little legs, the corner cafe where he had bought his first cup of hot chocolate with me. Everything looked smaller now, as if life itself had compressed while I was forced to grow alone. When I arrived, the house seemed different, not in structure, but in energy. It was tense, anxious, almost suffocating, the kind of tension only desperation can create. David opened the door. He looked older than I remembered, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. Claire was nowhere to be seen. He stammered, "Mom, thank you for coming. I do not know what to do." I walked inside, taking in the emptiness of the living room. The furniture was modern, cold, almost uninviting. Not a single photograph of our family adorned the walls. It struck me how carefully they had removed all traces of our shared life. I did not say anything. I let him wait. For a moment, silence became a teacher. Finally, I spoke. "David, tell me everything. From the beginning." He looked down at his hands. I lost the business. Everything went wrong. I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. I do not know how I am going to recover. I tried. I really tried. But I am not strong enough." I listened quietly, letting the weight of his words settle. All those years, I had endured because I knew life would test us in ways we could not predict. And now, he was facing a storm he had ignored for too long. "I see," I said softly. "Do you want my help? Or do you want to explain why you abandoned me first?" He flinched. I did not know how to. "I thought you would be better off, away from me. I thought I was helping." I shook my head slowly. "Helping? David leaving me in silence, sending me away. That was not helping. That was abandonment. And abandonment has consequences." He looked down ashamed. "I know, Mom. I am so sorry. I did not realize. I never realized." "Do you see, David?" I asked, my voice calm, controlled. "Life does not wait. Love does not guarantee respect. You cannot take what you have for granted, and you cannot expect forgiveness without understanding the pain you caused." He nodded silent, and for a moment I let the weight of all those years press upon us. The silence became a bridge we had avoided for decades. Then I did something I had not done in years. I reached into my bag and pulled out the legal documents, the investments, the property papers. "I have lived my life quietly, David," I said. "I have endured. I have given, even when it was not appreciated. I have been patient, but I am no longer at your mercy. Everything I have, everything I built, is mine to decide, and you will not take it for granted again." He swallowed hard, staring at the papers like a man seeing a ghost. "Mom, I had no idea. I did not know you had this." I smiled faintly. "You thought I was powerless. You thought I was weak. That mistake almost destroyed your life. Now, you see the truth." Over the next few days, we worked together. I guided him through decisions, helped him contact the right people, and slowly, carefully, we rebuilt what had been broken. Not just his finances, but his understanding of responsibility, respect, and gratitude. Every day I reminded him, "This is not a gift. This is a lesson, one you must learn, and never forget." Claire eventually returned, but the air between us was different. She tried her usual polite charm, but I did not flinch. I met her gaze calmly and said, "I am no longer someone you can manipulate or dismiss. Respect my presence or stay out of my life." Her smile faltered, but she nodded. For the first time, I felt the power of boundaries. A simple truth I had never enforced for decades. The grandkids noticed the change, too. When they came running to hug me, I hugged them back. Not as a woman desperate for love, but as one who had learned her worth. I spoke gently, guiding them, teaching them, and letting them see the woman I had been all along. Not the background character in their lives, but the foundation. Weeks passed and David began to change. He was more careful, more respectful, more aware of the effort and love that had shaped his life. He no longer assumed my presence, my generosity, or my forgiveness. He learned slowly what it meant to value someone beyond convenience. And as he grew stronger, I felt something shift inside me as well. I was no longer simply a mother responding to need. I was Grace, independent, powerful, unafraid, and finally, fully awake. Then came the day he finally said it. "Mom, I understand now. I cannot change the past, but I promise I will honor you from now on. I will not forget the sacrifices, the love, the patience you gave. I see you, truly see you, for the first time." I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I did not feel hurt. I felt relief. I felt pride. I felt the weight of decades lift, leaving only clarity and peace. I smiled quietly, warmly, and said, "David, that is all I ever wanted. Not your money, not your obedience, just your recognition and respect." That night I returned to the nursing home, but it felt different. The halls no longer seemed empty. The rooms no longer seemed cold, because I had reclaimed something that no one could take away. My dignity, my life, and my voice. I spent the evening writing letters. Not angry letters, but letters of guidance, of understanding, and of love. To David, to Claire, even to the grandkids. Not because they demanded it, but because I had the freedom to choose how to give. And now, I gave on my terms. Months later, when I looked back, I realized that the reckoning had not been about punishment. It had been about awakening. It had been about teaching them and reminding myself that love without respect is hollow, and that boundaries, once enforced, create strength, not distance. David never again took my presence for granted. Claire learned to respect me. The grandchildren grew to see me not as someone disposable, but as someone enduring, wise, and irreplaceable. And I finally learned to step fully into the life I had built. Not for anyone else, but for me. The first morning after the reckoning, I woke not to a house filled with tension, nor to the fear of abandonment. I woke to silence that was soft, warm, and full of possibility. It felt strange at first, as if the world had paused just for me, giving me a moment to breathe, to exist, to simply be. I walked to the window and looked outside. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting golden light on the trees. The garden was peaceful, untouched by chaos. For the first time in years, I felt free. I packed a small suitcase carefully, including only the essentials I truly loved. My photographs, a few books, my favorite music box, and the necklace my mother had given me. Every item carried a story, a memory, a piece of my soul. I smiled as I packed, not with sadness, but with anticipation. For decades, I had given everything to others. Now, it was time to give something to myself. The journey to Nassau felt like crossing into another world. The airplane hummed softly as I gazed out the window, the clouds stretching endlessly below. I remembered David's voice from the letter. "Mom, you deserve this. You deserve everything you have built." I had never realized how much strength I carried until that moment. I had endured abandonment, humiliation, and betrayal. Yet here I was, walking toward a life that was mine. Fully, completely, unapologetically. The condo in Nassau was even more beautiful than I had imagined. The sunlight bounced off the glass windows, reflecting a sparkling path onto the hardwood floor. The sound of the ocean waves created a rhythm that seemed to match the beating of my own heart. I walked through each room slowly, breathing in the air, letting it fill me. This was not just a house. It was a symbol of everything I had survived. It was proof that I had lived with courage, patience, and love, and that I had never been powerless. I unpacked the photographs first, placing them on the walls and tables. Each picture reminded me of the life I had lived, the joys, the struggles, the quiet victories. I hung a photograph of David as a little boy, smiling with innocence, unaware of the mistakes he would make, and beside it, a photo of myself, young and strong, determined, and full of hope. I smiled, whispering softly, "Grace, you have finally come home. To yourself." Days turned into weeks, and I began to explore not just my condo, but my own desires, dreams, and passions. I walked along the beach every morning, collecting seashells, feeling the sand between my toes, and listening to the rhythm of the waves. I read books I had always postponed, journaled my thoughts, and painted small canvases, capturing the freedom and peace I felt. For the first time, I understood that life did not have to revolve around others. I could live fully, independently, and with joy. One afternoon, I received a call from David. He sounded nervous, hesitant. "Mom, I wanted to thank you. I have been trying to rebuild my life, and I cannot believe how much I have taken for granted." I listened patiently. His words were sincere, but I remained calm. "I accept your apology, David," I said softly. "Just remember, respect is earned, love is given freely, and boundaries are necessary," he sighed, relief mixed with regret. "Mom, I will never forget what you have done for me. I hope one day I can repay you, not with money, but with care, attention, and honesty." I smiled, quietly proud. The past could not be changed, but the future could be written anew. By me, not by his mistakes. I began to reconnect with a few people I had lost touch with over the years. Old friends, distant relatives, even neighbors I had cherished. All reminded me that life was never truly empty, only paused. I found joy in these connections, but I no longer relied on them for validation. I was complete on my own. Then came the day I decided to start a small foundation, a place to help elderly people who had been abandoned or ignored, much like I had once felt. I wanted to give back, not out of obligation, but out of understanding, empathy, and love. I called it Graceful Horizons, a reminder that every life, no matter how long or difficult, deserved dignity, respect, and hope. Running the foundation became a new purpose, a new chapter. I met people who had stories of pain, resilience, and endurance. And I listened, comforted, and guided them. I realized that my own experiences had prepared me to be a beacon for others. Each day I felt lighter, freer, more alive. The shadow of the past no longer haunted me. It had transformed into wisdom, strength, and compassion. One evening, as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I stood on my balcony and reflected. I thought of David, of Claire, of the grandchildren, and of the life I had endured. I realized something profound. Happiness was not something others could give me. It was something I had to claim. And I had claimed it fully. The memories of humiliation, abandonment, and betrayal no longer carried pain. They were lessons, reminders of strength, resilience, and the power of self-worth. I also allowed myself to dream again. Small trips, new hobbies, even the thought of love in some distant future. All possibilities stretched before me, unthreatening, free. I laughed often, freely, and without guilt. I cried when I felt the need, but those tears were no longer for sorrow. They were for healing, release, and understanding. Months later, David came to visit. He was respectful, humble, and truly grateful. We walked along the beach together, talking honestly about mistakes, forgiveness, and growth. And for the first time, I did not feel resentment. Only clarity, only peace, he said quietly. "Mom, I finally understand. You taught me more in 1 year than I learned in decades. Thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You taught yourself by facing your choices, David. I simply let you see the truth. That is all." As he left, I returned to my balcony. watching the waves crash gently against the shore. The wind kissed my face. I felt the fullness of life, unbroken, unchained, and beautifully mine. I understood finally that freedom is not about running away from pain. It is about embracing your strength, setting boundaries, and walking forward with dignity. And I walked forward, fully awake, fully alive, ready to live the life I had always deserved.